see everyone. My name is Susan Litton, and John Carter and I are the new co-chairs of Adult Formation. We are very enthusiastic to try to get great programming for you every single week so that this can become part of everybody's routine, which I would love. And frankly, Mandy is going to be a hard act to follow. I can't promise we'll have something like this every week. But for today we do, and she told me she doesn't want an introduction because she wants to get straight to the comment. So thank you so much, Mandy.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I love adult formation, all the different kinds of things. So if you haven't already volunteered to lead an adult formation, I would encourage you to do so. Okay, so I'm Mandy Suhr-Sytsma. I know most of you. I come to St. Bart's most weeks. I also teach in the English department and the Native American and Indigenous Studies Initiative at Emory. I am not Native. I got into Native American literature in college when I read this book, which I will talk about a little bit later. And I've just been studying and engaging Indigenous literatures ever since. So, who knows what holiday is tomorrow? Yes.
Indigenous Peoples.
Yes, Indigenous Peoples Day. It's tomorrow. It is now a U.S. federal holiday. So go Biden. And I'm not going to talk much about like what is Indigenous Peoples Day, how did it come to be, how could you like advocate for like the there's advocacy campaigns, lots of them, to try to get rid of Columbus Day, which is still also a federally recognized and in many cases state recognized holiday. You can find all kinds of great stuff about that online, including there's a group called Illuminative and a group called Cultural Survival that has like lists and resources of like things you can do to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day and get involved with increasing the recognition of the day and with overturning Columbus Day. But one really important thing I think we can all do, whether we're Indigenous or not, wherever we're coming from, to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day is to just listen to the voices of Indigenous people. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to open and close in prayer, and we're going to talk about some poetry by Joy Harjo, and I'm going to share with you, I'm going to do a lot of show and tell about books and resources that you can continue to engage on your own as you continue to listen to and share Indigenous voices with others. So for our opening prayer, we're going to hear from Craig Womack. Raise your hand if you, sorry, I gotta find the right video. Raise your hand if you came to my adult Sunday school class like a couple years back where we watched a documentary film with Craig Womack and Rosemary McCombs Maxey. So that film, Hearing the Call, it's on one of your handouts. It's beautiful. And so Dr. Craig Womack is Muscogee, and he is retired professor from Emory, so he was my colleague for a long time. And he did some opening remarks when we virtually hosted Joy Harjo at Emory in 2021. And so I'm not playing all of his remarks, but he's going to sing a prayer for us in Muscogee language. So we're going to open with his prayer, and then we're going to close with a prayer that's in your packet that closes this book by Joy Harjo, and I'm going to need 2 volunteers to read that, so I'm warning you now. I need volunteers. Okay. I should back up a second. We're on Muscogee land at St. Bart, so if you didn't know that, now you do, and that's why we're focusing on this Muscogee voice, and Joy Harjo is also a citizen of the Muscogee Nation. So, all right.
We're trying not to do land acknowledgement that are just a single sentence. So I'm going to attempt to say what I think needs to be said and not to be aware of people's time, which, after all, is one of our most precious commodities.
Trying to make it large. Okay.
Here at Emory, we're trying not to do land acknowledgements that are just a single sentence. So I'm going to attempt to say what I think needs to be said and not to be aware of people's time, which, after all, is one of our most precious commodities. We're very excited to have a poet of this stature, Joy Harjo, join us here in the homelands of the Muscogee People, and the place where, in fact, her own relatives originally fell from. Where I come from, when we start something important, we often begin by fasting, or praying, or singing, and I don't know about all y'all out there in different time zones, but I've already blown the fasting part, so praying and singing. And the song addresses both of these issues. The words say that we're to begin our prayers early in the morning, even though during the day we might grow tired or weary, or to use the language of the song, we might become bothered, or to sustain those prayers up until the evening. And I don't know about you all, but for me, I think many people doing the work of social justice right now, we're pretty tired. And we're beginning to wonder if this kind of work is even possible at this point in history. But the song tells us we got to keep going. This poet is a case in point. Her career now is in its 4th decade. And I know for a fact there have been times when she's been weary and discouraged and tired like all the rest of us, but she's continued forward with this important work. So here's the song.
So Joy Harjo, raise your hand if you've heard of Joy Harjo before. Okay, at least half, that's great. If not, that's all right. That's why you're here. So that's Joy Harjo. She is a highly acclaimed poet, author, musician, literary activist. She wears many hats. And as Dr. Womack mentioned, she's been doing this work for like 4 decades, and she was the U.S. Poet Laureate for 3 years, through like last year. So she was quite widely known in the poetry world, and then became more widely known, of course, when that happened. So she's written many books and put out many albums of music. You can read about those on her website. You just look joyharjo.com. But we gotta be speedy, so we're gonna jump to some poems. So this collection of poetry at American Sunrise, if you don't have one of these, you should. So this is just, right there. So she wrote this collection. She's based in Oklahoma now. She's lived all over the world, but she wrote this collection while at the University of Knoxville. So she and her husband came back to the homelands, to the southeast, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. She was writing this, and you're going to hear her in a second talk more about that. So I'm going to be very brief, but just to let you know, this is a whole volume of poetry that is, among other things, about that journey. And so in addition to the packet of poems you also have this handout that says, it's just 1 page, no staple, listening to Muscogee and other Indigenous voices. And the first thing on here, under that title, in my name, is a little bit of a space where you could take some notes or write down questions about the poem Exile of Memory that we're going to listen to Joy Harjo read. I also would really encourage you to just follow along with the poem itself in this packet. So I just gave you like the preface on the first page of the book in American Sunrise, and then I gave you the whole poem Exile of Memory. So I would encourage you to follow along. So you could also jot down notes on the, by the homes themselves. And I encourage you to jot down notes, because after we watch the poem, we'll talk about it. Things that stand out to us, things we have questions about. All right, with that, I'm going to let us turn it back to Joy Harjo.
It's Jay Stonego. I'm really happy to be here with you at Emory. And in this performance tonight, I want to start with the South. Certainly there's a lot of Muscogee Creek history there. And one part of my family comes directly from just south of there, the Emory Mountains and that whole area. I have a great-great-grandmother. My great-great-grandmother, Katie Menominee, is the granddaughter of Menominee, who fought Andrew Jackson in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. And her mother was from that area, from the Columbus, Georgia area. And so I have an uncle, a great-great-great-great-uncle, Patty Carr. His brother was Thomas Carr, and that's my ancestor. Well, Patty Carr owned the largest racing track, the largest horse racing track on the eastern seaboard. So you can imagine that he brought in, had a lot of influence and money. So when the Andrew Jackson came through and decided that the lands in the South were incredible, and set us, all of us southeastern natives, on this trail of tears. Many people have this idea that we were like lurking out in the woods with no culture, with no culture, with no written culture, but that just wasn't so. And so he was moved, everyone, no matter, we were all moved. And I took a job at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, one, because they were wonderful people, and two, my husband and I got to go back to the homeland area. The Tennessee River is a major roadway, and our peoples traveled up and down that river. So we went all over that place, and I kept remembering, I remember years ago I would talk to the old people and they'd say, well, you shouldn't go back there. And I realized after being there is the reason they said that is because it's so painful to go back and you don't see your people there. And it's as if we've been wiped out of history. It's as if we didn't exist, or if we do exist, it's under some kind of false construct. And I'm going to start with this poem called Exile of Memory. Because our memories are very alive and our stories are still there in that place. Do not return. We were warned by one who knows them. You will only upset the dead. They will emerge from the spiral of little houses lined up in the furrows of Maryland and walk the land. There will be no place in memory for what they see, the highways, the houses, the stores of interlopers perched over the blood fields where the dead last stood. And then what? You with your words in the enemy's language, do you know how to make a peaceful road to human memory? And what of angry ghosts of history? Then what? Don't look back. In Sunday school, we were told Lot's wife looked back and turned to salt, but her family wasn't leaving paradise. We loved our trees and waters and the creatures and earths and skies in that beloved place. Those beings were our companions, even as they fed us, cared for us. If I turn to salt, it will be of petrified tears. from the footsteps of my relatives as they walked west. I did not know what I would find. The first night we set up our dad in the empty room of our condo over the Tennessee River. They heard we were coming, those who continued to keep the land, despite the imposition of newcomers and the forced exile of our relatives. All night, they welcomed us. All night, the stomp dancers. All night, shell shakers. All night, circle after circle made a spiral to the Milky Way. We were still in mourning. The children were stolen from these beloved lands by the government. Their hair was cut, their toys and handmade clothes ripped from them. They were bathed in pesticides, and now clean, giving prayers in a foreign language to recite as they were lined up to sleep alone in their army-issued cages. Grief is killing us. Anger tormenting us. Sadness eating us with disease. Our young women are stolen, raped, and murdered. Our young men are killed by the police, or killing themselves and each other. This is a warning. Heroin is a full companion offering freedom from the conflict history. Meth speeds you past it. Alcohol, elixir, false bravado will take you over the edge of it. Enough chemicals and processed craving and you can't push away from the table. If we pay enough, maybe we can buy ourselves back. We used to crowd the bar for Tuesday nights, 10-cent beer night. It was the Indian poetry, biker, and student bar in that university and military-based town. Trays packed with small cups of beer passed non-stop over the counter all night. We brought all of our thirsty dreams there, gambled with them at the pool table all night, danced with them and each other on the blood-stained dance floor to jukebox songs fed by dimes and quarters all night. And by 2 a.m. we staggered out to the world made by Puritan dreaming. No place for Indians, poets, or any others who would risk the wild winds for dangerous knowledge all night. In the complex here, there is a singing tree. It sings of the history of the trees here. It sings of Monopoly, who stood with his warrior friends on the overlook staring into the new town erected by the legal evidence. It sings of the Civil War camp, the bloodied, the self-righteous, and the forsaken. It sings of atomic power and the rise of banks whose spires mark the worship places. The final verse is always the trees. They will remain. When it is time to leave this place of return, what will I say I found here? From out of the mist, a form wrestled to come forth. It was many-legged, of many arms, and sent forth thoughts of many colors. There were deer standing near us under the parted misted sky. As we watched, they smelled for water. Green light entered their bodies from all leaved things they ate. The old Muscogee laws outlawed the Christian religion because it divided the people. We, who are relatives of panther, raccoon, deer, and the other animals and winds, were soon divided. But Muscogee ways are to make relatives. We made a relative of Jesus, gave him a Muscogee name. We could not see our ancestors as we climbed up to the edge of the destruction, but from the dark we felt their soft presences at the edge of our mind, and we heard their singing. There is no word in this trade language, no words with enough power to hold all that we have become. We are in time. There is no time in time. We are in a traditional village far back in town, Ikanajaga. Mother Earth is in labor so long in time. The keeper of burden is tracking her energy in time. My thinking is questioning how this time. A young boy wrestles with 2 puppies at the doorway. A little boy bearing an old woman's spirit appears with green plants in her hands. Twins play around the edge of the bed. Earth's womb tightens with the need to push. That's all I can see because of the fogginess of time. I sing my leaving song. I sing it to the guardian trees, this beloved earth, to those who stay here to care for memory. I will sing it take a day. There was a singing tree up there, where I was living on that bluff that overlooked Knoxville. And it was the same bluff my grandfather went off and stood on with his warriors as they looked down over that then very small town and steal the best horses that they could steal. It wasn't stealing because those were still Muscogee lands. This is called Speaking Tree. And
We
it
could
starts.
listen to Joy Harjo read poetry all day, but we don't have all day, so we're gonna stop there. All right, so there's lots of things we could talk about with this long poem, Exile of Memory. In some ways, it's kind of like a thesis for the whole collection. Most of the poems in the collection are much shorter. But I tell you a little bit on the handout about some threads she weaves through the whole collection, including the central thread that she talked about in her opening remarks, too, of her many times removed great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Manawe, and tracing his experience and her other ancestors' experience leading up to and on the Muscogee Trail of Tears. But I want us to focus on discussing just the first 3 pages of this for the sake of time. So if you go back to the second page of your handout, which you have the title of the poem, Exile of Memory, and then Do Not Return. So go ahead and review what's there. Do not return, you were born by the one who knows things. I just want to talk a little bit about what is happening in these first 3 pages of the poem. All right, so anybody, on this first page, who's talking to who? What are they saying? Don't be shy.
Yeah, like the elders, or even maybe the past elders advising the younger generation who may be like curious and being like, oh, should we go back to this place? And they're like, it's like filled with ghosts.
Yeah, do not return. So the elders are saying, don't go back there. You know, the we is the younger generations, including like Harjo herself and her husband. You know, as she told us in the opening remarks, like they always said, don't go back. Like, don't go back to that place. And so why did they say that in this first chunk of the poem? Why did they say, don't go back?
What struck me immediately was the old adage, and I don't know the origin, but the expression, you can never go home again.
Yeah, because it's changed, right? It's not going to be home anymore. Yeah.
There's the line, there will be no place in memory for us.
Mm-hmm.
Like you may
So
wake
why bother?
like you may wake up the ghosts of the people who died there, and then when they wake up, they're just gonna see like there's nothing left, and it's all been completely taken over, and you can't give them peace once they've woken up and seen that.
Yeah, exactly. So don't go back because this line is, you will only upset the dead, right? The third one. You're going to wake up these ancestor ghosts. You're going to upset them because they won't be home anymore. They won't recognize any of this stuff that they see. It'll be so changed. And then what are you going to do? It's almost like taunting you with your words in the enemy's language. Joy Harjo, who has a 1997 anthology of Native women's poetry called Reinventing the Enemy's Language, right? So she has some Muscogee now, but she's writing mostly in English. What, you with your enemy's language, how are you going to make a peaceful road? Like, you're not going to be able to, like, you know, help these ancestors have, like, a peaceful journey with you there, right? Does anyone remember what reason she gave in her opening remarks about why the old one said don't go back? Is that a hand drawn? She said it's because it's too painful. She said the old ones always told us, don't go back to the southeast. And then she said now that she's done it, she's realized, oh, it's because it's so painful. She said it's so painful not to see your people there. You know, she said we've been erased or we are represented in this false construct way, right? The Georgia state standards for kids in schools, the only thing they require them to learn about is like Spanish explorers and then removal. So there's like no attention to Muscogee and other Indigenous peoples alive today, or really anytime post 1836, right? Okay, so then let's continue to the next page. don't look back. And then we have the reworking of Lot's wife. I'm excited to talk about this page with you all, because increasingly at Emory, my students don't know who Lot's wife is, right? They don't all share like a common like biblical literature knowledge base. So one of them always has to tell the other ones like, I think this is what I remember from, Hebrew school or church. But you all know about Lot's wife, right? So someone remind us first maybe you don't all know about Lot's wife. So someone remind us real quick, what happens in the biblical narrative of Lot's wife?
She looked back.
Yeah.
God is destroying Sodom and she looks back.
Yes,
on
yes.
destruction.
Yes, and God said, don't look back, so the punishment is to turn your pillar of salt.
Well, because, there was evil there.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that's contrary to what, what she's saying about what they're leaving. They're not leaving hell or evil. They're leaving,
Yes.
they're leaving paradise.
Okay, yes, great. So you're already getting to the contrast, the way Harjo reworks that biblical narrative, right? So she's saying, but Lot's wife wasn't leaving paradise, right? She was leaving evil, and so Harjo's drawing that contrast. We were leaving paradise. We loved our trees and our waters.
And that, to me, that line, that's one of the ones I marked. We loved our trees and our waters. That's where the pain is. To think, if you go back there and you see those trees, you won't be able to stand it.
Yes. So there's also the seeing the beauty of the place, including the trees and waters that are still here, and thinking about the loss of having left. Anything else stood out to y'all, or questions you have about page 7?
Even the trees, aren't they all changed when you go back?
Yes.
Not the same as before.
Yes. There's some trees that are as old as 1836, but not very many. But maybe some, descendants of those trees. And then there's the heartbreaking, it would be, if I turned to salt, it would be a petrified tears from the footsteps of my relative as they walked west. That's just whew. And one of the things she's told us about in the opening is that, a lot of people in the general public they think Trail of Tears, one thing, Cherokee people, whatever, but they don't realize, there's lots of Trails of Tears, right? There's lots of Trails of Tears for Indigenous peoples in this time period, but also one of the things she does in the opening, I gave you just kind of that opening preface, and then she does this a bit throughout the book as well, is draw attention to what she calls contemporary Trails of Tears, right? And so she's explicitly thinking about Indigenous peoples making their way up from the Southern Hemisphere now as a continuation of the Trail of Tears. And you get a very deliberate reference to this later in the poem. I know we're focusing on the first 3 pages, but I just wanted to point out on the 4th page of this poem, when she talks about the kids lined up to sleep alone in their Army-issued cages, she's talking about Indian boarding schools, for sure. But she's also, for sure, using that specific terminology to draw the link between, she's writing this 2017, 2018, it comes out in 2019, to contemporary experiences of Indigenous kids at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Well, and I think, I also wonder if she's kind of challenging, white people, all people, and not wanting to learn history because it's too painful, as opposed to it can be, cleansing. So whether it's, Native Americans or any history that people want to ignore because it was awful.
Definitely, and that's a major theme throughout the whole collection. I'm reading student papers now about poems, all kinds of poems in this collection. A lot of them are about how she's grappling with that tension between needing to face dark things in history and in the present, but also the pain of doing that, and sometimes the wanting to do that and not wanting to do that at the same time, or dealing with other people who are in very deliberate ways refusing to do that work. Okay, so let's go to the next page.
Could you give us a page number?
Page 8. Nathan, can you just read page 8 for us quick? Jog your memory, okay.
I did not know what I would find. The first night we set up our bed in the empty room of our condo above the Tennessee River, they'd heard we were coming. Those who continued to keep the land despite the imposition of newcomers and the forced exile of our relatives. All night they welcomed us. All night the stomp dancers. All night the shell shakers. All night circle after circle made a spiral to the Milky Way.
Thanks. Okay, so where are we now? Anybody?
We're back in Tennessee.
It's okay if it seems obvious. Yes, we're in Tennessee. As she told us in the opening remarks, you know, the speaker of the poem is not always the author of the poem, but in this case it is. She's telling us it's her. So it's her and her husband. They have a condo. It's their first night there above the river in Knoxville. And so that's where we are. Thank you. And so what's happening here?
To me, it sounds like an indigenous expression of what in the church we would talk about the communion of saints, the spirits of the indigenous ancestors.
Yeah, so we can read that they all night, they welcomed us. We could definitely read that as her Muscogee ancestors, right? They welcomed us, the stomp dancers, the shell shakers, circle after circle to the Milky Way. She's been thinking about her ancestors. She's coming to the land of the ancestors, so that makes sense. And if you know a tiny bit about Muscogee teachings and worldview, you know that the Milky Way, Spiral Through the Stars, here's another book about Muscogee knowledge. The Milky Way is a space of the ancestors also. So that is a very compelling interpretation of who the they is. Did anyone read the they differently?
Is that like a memory? Are they memories that she's talking about? Ancestral memories?
Yeah, so it could be there could be multiple layers, right? So it could be in this moment that she and her husband just got to Tennessee, the ancestors are welcoming them at that moment. It could also be she's tapping into ancestral memories of stomp dances having happened in this place, you know, for hundreds of years and connecting to that. Yeah.
I was thinking, I feel like it's exactly what she was warned would happen, it woke them up too.
Yes. Hold that thought till we come back to that. The they could also be the Indigenous Students Association at the University of Knoxville, Muscogee and other Indigenous people living in that region and coming out. You know, often ceremonies involving stomp dance happen all night. Literally you stay up till dawn doing the stomp dances. And so it could also be that, just contemporary people, because there are still Indigenous people, of course, right? In Knoxville and Atlanta and all over the Southeast. So,
Do they have powwows kind of thing?
yeah, so it could be the people who are still here keeping this place in the present tense, right? Or it could be all of those things, right? Because when people are having ceremony doing stomp dance with living people today, they're also thinking about the spirits of their ancestors being with them. And I like how you brought that analogy of, when I'm in church, I'm thinking about my ancestors sometimes being in that space with me as well. Okay, to go back to Sarah's point about it's happening. The spirits of the dead are coming up. Are they upset? Because remember on the first page of the poem on page 6, don't go back, you'll only upset the dead, right?
They welcomed.
Yeah, they're not upset. It seems like a contradiction, right? They're welcoming them. They're happy. And so that speaks to the tension throughout the collection, I think. I was talking about before, of you want to face history, you want to go back, but there's all this pain there for you, but also for the spirits of the ancestors.
But at the same time, then the next 3 pages are her reciting the traumas that happened since they left.
Yes. So you might also be waking up all of those memories or inviting your ancestors to face all of those histories that have happened since the forced removal from here. And so that tension, the tension of, and memory is another very powerful thread throughout this whole collection. So those tensions remain tensions. I think not just in this poem, but throughout the whole book. But there is a lot of emphasis, not just on the pain of coming back to this place, but also, and Harjo goes on to talk about this a bit more in the video recording from her virtual visit here in 2021 as well, but also the joy and the beauty and the restoration of connecting with ancestors in this place. All right, we are going to move along, okay? So I would highly encourage you to check out this book more on your own, even if you don't think you like poetry, it's very accessible and very narrative, as I hope you experienced with this Home Exile of Memory. And maybe you can get a copy I can help us get a copy for the church library if that's helpful, but it's very widely available too. So your local public library, I'm sure, has it, or Wicked if you ask them to. You also have that part about giving Jesus a Muscogee name, and my smiley face next to that.
What is the Muscogee name for Jesus?
I don't know. Sorry. Homework. Okay, so we're not gonna like talk about everything else on this handout, but I adapted it from something I prepared for another discussion of this book, so you have it to take with you as we read more Harjo poetry on your own. And also, number 4 on the first page of your listening to Muscogee and other Indigenous voices handout also just has some like tips for reading poems in general. So that might be helpful, even if you're reading poetry not by Harjo. And then on the back side of this handout, you have some additional texts for engaging in American Sunrise. Joy Harjo is very, very prolific, so I didn't give you like a list of all of her books, but her website, has that information. So if you just go to joyharjo.com, oops, I got logged out, so someone could. Oh, there it is, thanks. So if you go to her website, you can learn more about all of her many books and musical albums. Her project, Living Nations, Living Words, is her signature poet laureate project, and it's literally like a map. So you can like zoom in and learn about Indigenous authors, poets from different parts of North America. And then I give you a list of some texts about Trails of Tears of Indigenous Peoples of the Southeast. I give you some texts by Muscogee authors. And then texts, the thing I added for you all, was texts on Native Christian experience, violence, dialogue, and repair. And I made a little note that Craig Womack, who we heard singing to start us off today, I forgot to bring his book with me, but he has a novel called Drowning in Fire, which I list under the text by Muscogee authors chunk. And I know that it's also good for Pride, because we have Pride today, right? So it's like a queer coming of age Muscogee boy rural Oklahoma story, and it's just beautiful. Caitlin Curtis's book, Native Identity, Belonging, Rediscovering God, is great. She's Potawatomi, and she also lived here in Decatur in Atlanta. Her husband was at Emory for a few years, and the book opens with her walking at Stone Mountain and thinking about like Muscogee and Cherokee people in that space. Deborah Miranda's book, Bad Indians, is one of my favorite books of all time. It's beautiful. Lots of like archival work with California Native history. So stuff by like
No, bring up the book so that people on the screen
stuff
can
by priests and soldiers and others involved with the like mission system in California. So lots of dark stuff, but good stuff too. Also good for Pride. There's like a nice like lesbian romance plot to balance out the really dark stuff. And then Sterling Harjo. Has anyone watched Reservation Dogs? Hit TV show on Hulu. You should watch it if you're not. It's amazing. It just finished its run. It had 3 seasons and it's done. But Sterling Harjo is like a very prolific filmmaker. He has several films, including this documentary, This May Be the Last Time, which is about Muscogee funerals and Muscogee churches and the way that Muscogee churches like keep the language going by singing Muscogee language hymns. So if you liked hearing Dr. Womack sing in the language, you can hear lots of great singing in the language in that documentary. This May Be the Last Time. And then I tell you about Siobhan Colonel is a Methodist minister and a like stomp ground ceremonial leader. So he's a really interesting guy. He's a key contact for us at Emory in our like still quite nascent relationship building with Muscogee Nation in Oklahoma. And he comes here occasionally. So he will be here Tuesday. So you may have heard of Little Amal. Little Amal, the not so little giant puppet of the Syrian girl. Interestingly, in talking about Trails of Tears in this book, Harjo also talks about like the Syrian war and about refugees and all kinds of global kinds of connections too. So Little Amal is coming to Atlanta today, and there's all kinds of events with that. If you just go to that website, Walk with Amal, you'll see them. And her closing event is Tuesday night, I want to say 6:30. I'm sorry, I forget where. It's at a park in Atlanta. and it's with Reverend Shaban Colonel, and it's called This Ancient Land, and it's Shaban and some other Muscogee leaders will be here to like help ground everybody in this place in a Muscogee way. So that is like Tuesday this week. And then he will probably also be back with us, Shaban, for the Muscogee Teach-In. So this is an annual event at Emory, and it's going to be October 27th. You don't have to write all this down because in a second I'm going to talk about a couple things on my other handout, including a website where we tell you about all kinds of events at Emory in the community. There's this great podcast, Poetry Unbound, which includes interviews with all kinds of poets and discussions of all kinds of poems, including quite a few by Indigenous poets. And then I, just last week, okay, let me give you a little more context. So, ICT, formerly Indian Country Today, is like the leading sort of national native-run newspaper about news affecting Indigenous people in the U.S. And I got to meet the managing editor a couple weeks ago, Jordan Bidet. And one of the things she talked about is how her association that she's involved with of Indigenous journalists, supports Indian Country Today, Native American Calling, Muscogee Media, other Indigenous produced news sources. And they also are increasingly doing trainings for legacy newsrooms, including NPR, New York Times, those kinds of places. And I am hearing that influence when I hear Indigenous stories now on NPR. They're getting better. And I heard one just last week, I think Friday, talking about efforts to repudiate the doctrine of discovery, which Pope Francis finally did a few months ago. And other denominations are doing this kind of work too. And one of the people they interviewed for this story was the Reverend Dr. Canon Mary Christ, who is the Indigenous Theological Education Coordinator for the Episcopal Church. So Episcopalians! So then I went down this rabbit hole over the last couple of days looking into her, and she's California based, and I think she's Blackfeet, she's Indigenous herself, and I found this amazing 50 slides presentation she did talking about Indigenous knowledge in relation to Episcopal life. So she would be a great person if we want to invite someone to come do more work with us. And other people they interviewed too were doing really cool things. So one thing we talk a lot about at Emory is what's the point of there's a lot of land acknowledgements happening now that sometimes and then there's a lot of Indigenous people who are critical of them when they're just performative, right? What's the point? You just gave yourself a liberal pat on the back because you did a land acknowledgement, right? The point is you're supposed to acknowledge the land so as to seek to learn from the Indigenous people here over this land and be in reparative relationship, right? So I believe it was a Mennonite guy. One of the religious leaders they interviewed on that NPR podcast talked about his congregation in Pasadena, making their land acknowledgement meaningful in a variety of ways, including by hosting in parishioners' homes some people from an Indigenous nation who were coming to the district court there, to try to protect a sacred site on their homeland in this court case. And then lots of other, interesting things in the news. We are pretty much out of time, so I'm gonna only very briefly just show you this other handout. So one of the things I do a lot of research on and writing about is Indigenous authored children's and young adult literature. So I get asked a lot by teachers and librarians and parents and people for resources. And so I maintain this, I lost my...
It totally turned itself off, I think.
Oh, okay. So I maintain this handout, the one that's long, the 5-pager, on my website. And I think we're the only search sites in the world, guys, right? So we're very Googleable. So you can find this digitally too. And it includes just, all kinds of resources that are good for continuing to learn more about Native nations. It includes a little bit of an annotated book list. I have many of those books with me. And then the last section is on ways to learn more and get involved, including following Native news media, reading more, participating in events, and that's where I give you the link to some of the events coming up at Emory. So we have the native.emory.edu site, but the events there are only events like our Native Studies Initiative is hosting or co-sponsoring. And so we also keep this community calendar that's more expansive. So like we hear about something happening at UGA or something, you know, the CDC Indigenous groups doing, we'll put it on that community calendar. But we also have our own events on there, so that's why I gave you that kind of long scholar blogs link. So we have the Little Mall, the Muscogee Teach-In. There's now also an annual stickball summit, which is super fun. Every spring that Lynn and Belvine hosts. So lots of good ways to keep involved. I think we have time for prayer, right? Okay, always time for prayer. So I need 2 volunteers who can read for us. Maybe people we haven't heard from yet. Okay, great, thank you. One more? Thank you. Okay, so you have it. You can stand where you are. So right after Exile of Memory, you have Bless This Land. Yeah. And so it's kind of call and responsey. So if one of you can read the not italics text and one of you read the italics text. Okay, we'll take that as our closing prayer and then we can head to church. Or if you have a couple minutes, you can look at my notes out. All right.
Shall I start, Sarah? Bless this land from the top of its head to the bottom of its feet.
From the Arctic cold white head to the brown feet of tropical rain.
Bless the eyes of this land, for they witness cruelty and kindness in this land.
From sunrise light, upright, to falling down on your knees night.
Bless the ears of this land, for they hear cries of heartbreak and shouts of celebration in this land.
Once we heard no gunshot on these lands, the trees and stones can be heard singing.
Bless the mouth, lips, and speech of this land, for the land is a speaker, a singer, a keeper of all that happens here on this land.
Voluminous forests, oceans, and rock cliffs, sold for the trash blood of gold, uranium, or oil bust rush. Yet there are new stories to be made, little ones coming up over the horizon.
Bless the arms and hands of this land, for they remake and restore beauty in this land.
We were held in a circle around these lands by song and reminded by the knowers that not one is over the other. No human above the bird, no bird above the insect, no wind above the grass.
Bless the heart of this land on its knees, planting food beneath the eternal circle of breathing, swimming, and walking this land.
The heart is a poetry maker. There is one heart, said the poetry maker, one body, and all poems make one poem. And we do not use words to make war on this land.
Bless the gut labyrinth of this land, for it is the center of unknowing in this land. Bless the femaleness and maleness of this land, for each holds the fluent power of becoming in this land.
When it was decided to be in this manner, here in this place, this land, all the birds made a birdly racket from indigo sky holes.
Bless the 2 legs and 2 feet of this land, for the sacred always walks beside the profane in this land.
These words walk the backbone of this land, massaging the tissue around the cord of life, which is the tree of life upon which this land stands.
Bless the destruction of this land, for new shoots will rise up from fire, floods, earthquakes, and fierce winds to make new this land.
We are land on turtle's back. When the weight of greed overturns us, who will recall the upright song of this land?
Bless the creation of new land, for out of chaos, we will be compelled to remember to bless this land.
The smallest one remembered, the most humble one, the one whose voice you have to learn and without you'd have to learn in 1,000 years to hear. We will begin there.
Bless us, these lands, said the rememberer. These lands aren't our lands. These lands aren't your lands. We are this land.
And the blessing began a graceful moving through the grasses of time, from the beginning to the circling around place of time, always moving, always.
And then ends middle, which is Muscogee for thank you. Thank you. All right, the end. Feel free to take an extra hand up for a friend who's like, come on, start.
Oh, good.
My nightmare. Right, I see this
You're ushering. You're on usher.
I'm not. Okay. Look, if there's another door, I need to know. Thank you.
Is this your?
I kind of struck it 15.
I also teach at Emory,
Can y'all
but
keep
different
track of
things.
that? What's valuable to be able to say we have 15?
I teach poetry, I teach African literature.
This is what happens in community meetings, at least with us. No one comes to the classes to the chair, and I'm like, I can't read. So keeping that, it helps keep emotion out of it. And you can look at it and say, oh, I know what you're drawing. Find it.
Okay, all right.
I think too.
So there were
It's
15
good to,
today?
I don't know that, but you might want to report that too. I just feel like that's valuable data to have. People watching I mean, that's great. They got it to work. It's hard.
Yeah, well,
This has always just stuck with me, so I've always hoped to come
were you
across
able
it.
to hear that?
Do you remember? No, I watched your presentation. Like northern Alaska and Canada.
I was just saying.
Oh, maybe.
I really recommend.
Maybe it was something different. Okay, so then
I track out because there's no other way to tell except
Okay, so
right
that
now.
was okay. I'll save that for him.
Okay. So I had hoped Alex would be here today, so we can talk to him.
It's his birthday.
Well, I don't bother that. Nonetheless, you've reached out to him and asked about his AP needs, or something you met this week.
Oh, Alex Esteban.
Yeah.
Oh, I was looking at Cheryl. I'll reach out to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because he's going to become automatic for us. Yes.
Eventually.
Well,
You
We
know,
have to get this back.
I'm so glad he is, yes, are you gonna take that back in?
Yeah.
Okay, we should turn it off.
You know,
All right, now turn off. All right.
And I'm gonna